As a continuation of the community-based discussions which I'm doing here on the channel, such as our favourite cars from Gran Turismo, etc., it only seems obvious and fair to, of course, go then to circuits. What are our favourite circuits from the entire series? And for this one, I'm actually going to do something a little bit different to the car list, which is I'm going to actually read out all of the circuits from Gran Turismo's history, which sounds like it would take forever, but actually there's a lot less circuits, obviously, than there are vehicles, which is one reason why it's a lot easier to do. But secondly, I feel like for a lot of us, you might forget a certain track that was in an older game, which you really loved, but it might have been lost to time. You could argue that means it's not your favourite, but I think on some occasions you can genuinely forget things, so some of these are actually tracks which weren't even included in the final game. So for those it's more of a reference, but I'm going to basically use a visual representation of the tracks in particular which make up my top 10, and I'd love to hear your top 10 as well. Again, that's a slight difference from last time with the cars, because with the cars I did either your favourite or like a top 5, maybe a top 10, but looking through all of those comments, I think having a top 10 is a lot better because it helps to see which ones really are mentioned the most. So if you give me your top 10 down in the comments, maybe before this, or maybe you could edit it if I jog your memory with any. So without any further ado, if you only care about what my number 1 is, and I'm feeling like this one's probably going to be the number 1 for many people, to be honest, we're literally kicking off with it because we're working through alphabetically, because it starts with a 24. The 24 Heure du Mans, aka Circuit de la Sarthe, aka Le Mans. Home of the 24-hour race, of course. This is my favourite circuit of all time in any game which has it. Simple as that. I know for many of you, you will at the very least love Le Mans as well, so it's a hell of a way of kicking off the list because that's my number 1 immediately done. I feel like for many of you it probably is as well. Next up on the list is Alsace. I'm guessing on some of the pronunciation for these, and some of them I never remember, but that one is a more recent addition, of course, a couple of different variations of that. We've got Apricot Hill. This is one which I do think has a good chance of coming back in future, and I wouldn't be surprised if that one does feature quite high for some people. Next one is Ascari. This is a track which I really do like. Didn't quite make my top 10, but I really do like it. I love Ascari as a brand anyway. Seems like a shame to have that license and not any of their cars, but yeah, that's a more recent one as well. Only featured in Gran Turismo 6, I believe. Then we've got Maggiore, which again is a more recent addition. Loads of different variations of that one. Must admit, not a huge fan of that track myself, but I feel like a lot of people probably are. Next one is Interlagos. I quite like this one. Wouldn't classify it as a favourite, but I do like Interlagos quite a bit. It's a fun track, it's got a quick pace, relatively short lap. Next up is Monza. I know a lot of people are going to have this one. I've never been a fan of Monza, personally. I know a lot of people hate to hear it, but it's too boring to me. It's too simple, it's too boring. That will be ironic when we get to some other tracks that I do love later on, but I'll try to explain why they're here and that one isn't. Next one is Autopolis. I don't really have much to say on that one. I feel like some people might love it, but yeah, that's another one that's on the list, I guess. Autumn Ring. Never been a fan of this one. Way too short, way too easy for me. But again, it does have its fans. Blue Moon Bay. This one is one of those tracks where I had loads of miles on, especially in GT Sport, which of course is where it was added in an update, but I wouldn't say it's a favourite. It's just a track that I used quite a lot. Next up, Brands Hatch. Iconic, but way too short for me. You already know I love really long technical tracks, ideally. Next one is Broadbean. I would be amazed if that's on anyone's list, and I really would love to hear it because that would be a hell of a track to have in your favourites. And I love how even Polyphony have just completely forgotten that track. They don't add any races for it at all, in addition to the original ones that we had. Cape Ring. I know this will be a favourite for some people. Much more limited in scope in terms of how many Gran Turismo games had it. I think it was, what, just GT5 and 6 basically. Mixed thoughts on that one. It's an interesting track, kind of mixes some realistic elements with some more fantastical ones like that huge loop. Next up is Cathedral Rocks. We're going a bit more old school there. Of course, that is the more rally based variant, if I recall correctly, of El Capitan, and of course we'll get to El Capitan in a second. Speaking of rally though, Chamonix, which is GT4 in particular, I didn't love it at the time, but having snow is such a rarity in Gran Turismo that it's fun. Then we've got the GT5 and 6 versions. You could just put Chamonix as your overall favourite, I guess, if you want to, or you could be more specific, depends on you. Next up is Catalunya, another massively popular one for many people. Hate to say it, but I've never been a fan. Don't like it in Forza, don't like it in Gran Turismo. I don't know why, it's just not for me. I don't know how to pronounce this one, I can never remember it, but Circuit de Saint Croix or Saint Croix. Again, I could see it having its fans. This one is probably criminal to some people that it's not on my list. It definitely will be on many of yours, and for some of you it could even be your favourite. I could definitely see that. Spa. Spa is so iconic. It is probably one of the top 3 most most iconic tracks in the world, but for me it's one which I like, but not enough to quite put it in my top 10. The next one is a fascinating track because as far as I can recall, it was only featured in, well, Tourist Trophy, and anyone who's played Tourist Trophy will remember it. I may even have some Tourist Trophy footage of it, I can't recall, and also it was featured in Gran Turismo PSP, so this really is a deep cut. I don't know if it was in any of the concepts, I don't know if it was in any of the prologues or anything, but it was definitely in the PSP, and that is Valencia, Circuit de Valencia Ricardo Tormo. This actually almost made my top 10 because of the obscurity factor, and I really do love driving on it. It's very flat, kind of reminds me of the, is it Dubai circuit I think, with a lot of the painted flat runoffs. It's an interesting track, a lot of fun with bikes. With cars, obviously I didn't get a huge amount of use on it, but it is a very fun track, and given that it's been in a couple of games, I could potentially see them bringing that one back. The next one, it is in my top 10, in fact this one comes in at number 9 for me, Sierra, Circuito de la Sierra. One of the biggest tracks in any Gran Turismo game, one of the longest circuits, only in GT6 as an update. I have a lot of time on this track. I'll probably even include some very recent footage from my re-review of the Lambo SV. And the only reason why, despite being a track which ticks every box that I usually love, it's technical, it's long, it's got a beautiful location, I spent a ton of time on it. Why is it number 9? Well, because for me, and this seems petty, but for such a newer installment in the franchise, and especially being an update circuit, it looks horrendous. I'm sorry to say it, but the graphics are so bad on this track, overexposed and like ultra PS2 looking, at a time when in GT6 you also had Midfield Raceway, which was like full HD update, and obviously this is a way bigger track, but yeah, it's my number 9, and I do love it, but it definitely couldn't be higher because it's so hard on the eyes to me, this track. The next one is Madrid. Don't really hear too many people talking about Madrid, but I could see it having some love, potentially. Next one is Rome. I think this one will be a favourite for many people. I seem to recall there were a couple of different variations of Rome, so that one may come back later, because this one is listed as Circuito di Roma, whereas I think one might have just been Rome, which is probably why it comes later on. But again, you could be specific, you could put just Rome, you could say which one you like. This one is on my list again. The next one, this is actually my number 7, Città d'Aria. One of the most challenging, one of the tightest, one of the most technical city courses. Of course, not featured since, Gran Turismo 4. In fact, I believe it was only featured in Gran Turismo 4. You'll see some footage of it most likely. It's horrendous for overtaking, and I find that it's a track which is a lot more fun to drive on your own, almost like Goodwood Hill Climb style, because it's so tight, more like a time attack course. But yeah, it's beautiful. You can kind of make up your own version of like doing a milli-millia kind of thing, and having those vintage or classic races there. It's a beautiful track, really technical. You really have to focus, it's very demanding. But yeah, I love that track, and like I said, that one is my number 7. The next one is a much more recent addition, Colorado Springs, of course, only featured in the past couple of games. Could be there for some people, I don't really have much to say about that one. The next one, another fan favourite, this one's usually considered side by side with Città d'Aria, didn't quite make my 10 though, Amalfi. This one I spent a lot of time on in career mode, because you could kind of spam it in the rally events and win that Toyota RSC rally raid and sell it for like a $250,000 every time. Beautiful track, but very simple. And the fact that you could pretty much just ride the wall all the way around made it a little bit too easy. The next one though, speaking of city courses, I think this one will be in at least people's top 5s in many cases. Surprisingly, doesn't quite make my list though, Côte d'Azur, aka Monaco. Legendary circuit. If they're going to bring back any city courses, I could easily see this being one of them. Again, not the best for overtaking. Anyone who watches Formula 1 will know that. My girlfriend actually doesn't like watching Monaco Formula 1 because of how boring it can be. But yeah, it's a beautiful track, beautiful location, one of the most iconic courses in the world for sure, city or otherwise. Next one, speaking of being iconic, certainly is Daytona. There's the road course, there's the oval, super iconic track. This is one of those where I'm surprised that I don't like it even more than I do. I like it fine enough for me, I'm kind of in the middle, I don't spend a huge amount of time there. Deep Forest is next, fan favourite, but I guess it depends on which version you go for. I personally find that I really like what was included up until Gran Turismo 6, but now in GT7 I have next to no feelings for Deep Forest anymore. To me it's lost all of its personality, but I feel like for newer players, or maybe just some who missed it so much that they'll take whatever they can get, you might really love it. The next one I spend a lot of time on, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a favourite, Dragon Trail. I really like Dragon Trail Seaside, I believe it is in particular, with that ironically very Monaco-esque square section corner toward the end, and I use that typically as one of my benchmark tracks for my car builds, of course. Next one spans a huge amount of circuits. Driving Park. Driving Park, for those who don't know, that's a ton of different tracks together, so we will have to run through these, and one of these is in my favourites. So first of all, we have the beginner's course, pretty basic one. We've got the circle course. That would be pretty hilarious if somebody had the circle course on their top favourites. There's the 60R, the 100R. The next one is in my top 10. It's actually my number 5, so it's pretty high, and it is, of course, complex string. Only featured in Gran Turismo 3, I made a replica of it using the track editor in Gran Turismo 6. I love complex string. The reason why it's my number 5 and not even higher is because I had to think to myself, if I could snap my fingers and bring these back, in the case of ones which are no longer featured, would I choose complex string over a couple of these others? And honestly, I would have to say no, because as much as I love it, I feel like it might be one of those tracks that I don't end up using quite as much as I would think. So as a created course, it's great, but yeah, it's a lot of nostalgia talking for sure, and I love how just wild and wacky and unique it is. Also in the driving park is the Gymkhana course. Can't really count that as a circuit, but a couple of these are just locations, I guess, so you could include that if you wanted to. Motorland, another one which I didn't use much. Of course, the test course. I have many miles on that track. That one, of course, has been kind of overshadowed by a certain other course, which is in my top 10. We'll get to that one later on. Then we have Eiger Nordwand. I'm guessing on pronunciation there. We've got the short track, multiple trails. I like it. It's a reasonably long dirt track, which makes it a lot more fun, but not in my top 10. The next one I think will be for many people. I do like this one quite a bit, and it's so close to being in my top 10, but didn't quite make it. It may actually be number 11, to be honest. El Capitan. Gorgeous track. I definitely prefer the road course over the rally, but yeah, beautiful track. Nice and technical. Doesn't take too long, but yeah, it's fun. It's a nice wide track as well, so overtaking's pretty good. Next one is Fisherman's Ranch. Again, a nice long one for the dirt enthusiasts. Not the most personality, but it is a fun course if you want more length in your rally lap, which certainly appeals to me. Next one, absolutely will be in many people's top 10, Fuji. A number of different versions, a number of different eras. Of course, it's super iconic. It's a bit too simple and a bit too quick for me for many cars, but in prototype racing in particular, it is pretty fun. Next one is George V Paris. There are a couple of Paris circuits, so don't get them mixed up. I think that was the nighttime one. We'll get to the other Paris track later on. Next up we have Goodwood. I think this one probably will be featured for some people, but again, don't get it mixed up. We have the motor circuit still, but in GT6 we had Goodwood Hill Climb as well. I think that will feature for some people because it is, you know, a great place. It's actually the racing location that I've visited more than anywhere else technically, because I've been to Goodwood a number of times. It's a great place to go if you can. Next up is the Gran Turismo Arena. Never really liked this one. There's the arena and the open layout, mostly for kart racing, I guess. I've never been a fan of kart racing, so Grand Canyon. I feel like Grand Canyon's one of those where I really should have a ton of memories for this one, but at the time I didn't love longer rally tracks as much because I was more like in my teen years. So Grand Canyon I think I would probably love more now than I did back then. Speaking of childhood love though, this one coming back, it's the same for me as Deep Forest. It's back now in GT7, Grand Valley. But Grand Valley just doesn't have the same kind of personality to it. If you look, for example, at my re-review of the Ferrari 599, just as one example, to me that version of it in Gran Turismo 6 looks so much better because it's what we grew up with than the version in GT7. GT7 may as well be called something else, I think, because it doesn't even feel like the same track to me, but whatever, each to their own. The next one is Green Forest. I have no memories of this thing. This is from Gran Turismo 2, apparently, a dirt track. Yeah, I never raced on this one, or I guess I must have, but I don't remember doing it at all. It's about 3.7 kilometers or whatever long, so, or that might be miles, I don't recall on the list, but yeah, pretty short track, I guess, or middling length. It's kind of a nothing burger for me. Grindelwald is the next one, also from Gran Turismo 2. I think this one might feature for some, probably from the nostalgia. I don't personally have nostalgia for this one, it didn't really jump out to me. The next one is Hadley. If that doesn't sound familiar, it's because it's only in Gran Turismo 6 and that's where you take the moon rover, so it's the moon, in other words. I feel like some people will probably have that on their list just for the meme of it, and it's fun, but it's very limited in scope. You can take one vehicle there and you can't really do that much. It's basically like driving through a dust bowl, pretty much. So sure, put it on your list if you want, but for me, obviously not. High Speed Ring. High Speed Ring, it's kind of a mix for me. It's fun, but I find it bores me quite quickly. Hong Kong. This one was tough. I almost had it in my top 10. It's probably more so top 15 maybe for me. Hong Kong I never liked as a kid because it was so annoying and technical, like hitting curbs and it would ruin your racing line. But now I like that kind of stuff, you know, better challenge, it's more fun. That one's great for sure. I could see a lot of people liking Hong Kong. Next one's the Ice Arena. Don't have many memories of this one. It's a Gran Turismo 4 one. I barely even remember what that one looked like now, but again, it's snow, so that's fun. Next one, Indy. Of course, tons of people are going to have Indy. I love the Speedway, that unique kind of rectangular shape. Tons and tons of miles in Gran Turismo 5 earning money on Indy with the Red Bull. It's a fun track, definitely. I'm much more of a Sebring kind of guy over Indy, but of course we don't have that in the game. I want to love Indy even more than I do, but for me I don't quite have the same level of love for that one as many people. Speaking of love though, this one is not only on my list, it's a lot higher than I would have initially thought, but when I really sat down and looked at it, this is my number 3, Infineon. I adore Infineon. And once again, as a kid, I didn't. My old man, when he used to play Gran Turismo, he never liked this track. And as a kid, I found it just too difficult, but now that's why I love it. It's such a technical course. It somehow manages to look very grey and washed out, but still has a lot of almost like manic energy to it, like the track is almost goading you on with how challenging it can be. A lot of fun. There's a couple of different variations. If you watch my Forza content, I go back to Infineon quite often because I like the chance to do so. So yeah, I absolutely adore Infineon. It's a great track for me and kind of undervalued, and I think, didn't the name change or something like that, and it's probably one of the reasons why it's not in the franchise anymore. The next one definitely isn't in there for me, Kart Space. I feel like some people will probably love Kart Space. Isn't that the one I think with all the neon lights that's indoors or something like that? I've driven on it, but certainly not a fan. Next one, Kyoto. More recent edition, of course. A couple of different variations as well. I could see some love for that one. Lake Louise, very recent edition. In fact, unfortunately, the most recent edition at the time of making this video, because we haven't had another circuit since. Having snow, of course, is cool, but beyond that, I don't have much else to say. I know this one actually has a lot of fans, so that's really cool. I'm glad that a lot of people really love it. Speaking of people loving it, this one is definitely more of a meme circuit. It was only featured in Gran Turismo 4. It's technically a real location, the Vegas Strip. I spent a lot of time here testing out different cars and how they compare to each other, but I wouldn't say I loved the track. It was always a means to an end to me, but it's a cool little circuit, I guess, and it would be a lot more fun now in like online racing, although the loading times for the sake of doing a quarter mile, I'm not sure if that would be worth it. Next up is London. I guess I should love it as a Brit, but I never liked the London circuit. It's too short, too tight, too technical, but in kind of an ugly way to me. I think it will have its fans. Matterhorn is up next. I don't have much to say on this one, to be honest. I would occasionally race there, but not a huge fan of it. The next one is definitely in my top 10. It's a much more recent addition. I'm very glad to see it here as well. It's actually my number 6. Always been one of my favourites in Forza. Now it's one of my favourites in Gran Turismo as well, being added in 7, Road Atlanta. Gorgeous track. I will freely admit that the majority of my love for it comes from Panoz's involvement, and I think isn't the Petit Le Mans involved at Road Atlanta as well? I'm not sure if they still are, I don't keep up with it, but I think there may have been a connection there as well. So yeah, I love Road Atlanta. It's fast, it's got a great flow to it. It's one of the only shorter tracks that I still really love, and it's a beautiful location as well. Speaking of shorter tracks that definitely have a lot of love for me, some of you may be surprised that this isn't in my top 10, but Midfield Raceway actually doesn't quite make my top 10, despite the fact that as a kid it probably would have been my number 1. But yeah, Midfield I do have a lot of love for, and I do think it has a very, very good chance of coming back, not least of which because of its full HD with, I seem to recall, some time of day changes even in Gran Turismo 6. Next one is Motorsport Land. Gran Turismo 2, I don't really have any memories of this one, to be honest. The next one, probably number 1 for some people, definitely top 10 for many. Not for me, I know, it's sacrilegious. Mount Panorama. I know tons of people love this track, for good reason, very technical, decent length. It ticks many of the boxes that I would love, but I don't know, it's not quite there for me. This next one is my number 10 though, and for many of you I think you will love this one as well. In fact, I know many of you do because I've heard it before. New York. I love the New York circuit. I also love how, because it's based on the real streets, the Forza and Gran Turismo versions look virtually identical. but which of course makes sense. I do actually like the Forza version a little bit more, because they would have versions where it had chicanes to add more of a challenge, and that was even more fun. If it's between the Forza and Gran Turismo version, I would go Forza for sure, and for this one I'll probably even include some footage from one of the members' videos here on the channel where I jump back into Gran Turismo 4 to review one of the FPVs. The next one, I would be surprised if it makes it onto many people's list, Northern Isle Speedway. Not exactly a lot to love there. It's a very short track. Ironically, again, my girlfriend loves this track, specifically in Gran Turismo, because she'd just earn easy money with it basically early on in the game, so she'd just fly around that one. The next one is of course on my list. For some people this will be your number one, or at least a variation of it will. For me, it's my number two. You could argue it may be the single coolest, single most iconic, single baddest racetrack in the world, the Nürburgring. And of course, in particular, my favourite is what I used to call the pig's head as a kid because of the shape of the track, the Nordschleife. Specifically the Nordschleife. The 24-hour is cool, and of course it's even longer, which is great, but I really don't like the GP course. So the fact that the 24-hour adds the GP course doesn't really help it for me. I prefer the pure Nordschleife. Absolutely adore the Nürburgring. I have thousands upon thousands of miles there in every single game which has it. Well, maybe not every game, maybe not Project Gotham, but pretty much everything else, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Again, like I said, it will be the number one for many people. For me, it's my number two. Those of you who know me know the only reason why it's my number two is because of that number one being Le Mans. But yeah, my number one and two I feel like are decidedly mainstream choices for me, which is unusual. Typically I go for more obscure stuff. Not just to be different, but because I do like more obscure stuff. But on this occasion, my number one has to be Le Mans, like I said, and number two has to be the Nürburgring, with my more unconventional number three of Infineon. But yeah, that's my top three covered now. Next up, we have the other Paris circuit, Opera Paris. This was the daytime one. I like this one more than George V. I feel like this one's even more underappreciated, even more undervalued, but I quite like this track. It was especially fun in stuff like lower level hatchbacks and classic cars, quite tight. I feel like a lot of people probably didn't use it much, it was only in Gran Turismo 4. The next one is a track which was apparently supposed to be in Gran Turismo 5, but it's called Piazza del Campo in Siena, and it was removed apparently for licensing reasons. It was 0.3 of a kilometre or 0.3 of a mile, and it was designed for karting. So of course, I couldn't care less that it's not featured, but that's an interesting one because I'd never even heard of that before. But in terms of things that you've definitely heard of, this one will be in some of your top 10s, I have no doubt of that. It's only featured in Gran Turismo 2, which is shocking, given that Gran Turismo is literally like a sponsor, I believe, on this track. Pikes Peak, the hill climb and the downhill. The only reason, I know it's shocking for me who loves Pikes Peak cars and loves Pikes Peak to not have it in my top 10, the only reason why it's not in my top 10 is, strangely, for someone who loves Gran Turismo 2 so much, it's probably my second favourite game to GT4, I barely have any memories of racing here, which is so weird. I don't recall if maybe it was a higher level thing and I just wasn't good enough, because again, I was like 6 or 7 years old, so I probably wasn't quick enough to unlock the track or to race there. I have some vague memories of the downhill bouncing off the walls, but that's about it. So I'd love to be able to have it in my top 10, but I just can't justify it because I have so few memories of it. The next one is Toscana, the Rally Toscana. That one was in GT5 and 6. Don't really have too much to say about that one personally. The next one is the Red Bull Ring. Too short. I just find a lot of dodgy stuff with the AI seems to happen on this track in various events. So yeah, I don't know. Red Bull Ring, or the Österreich Ring, I believe it used to be called, something like that. A lot of people love it, but for me, yeah. Red Rock Valley though is one which not only we have rumours of it coming back, I think it's actually more than rumours. I believe it was discovered in code or something if I recall. I talked about that ages and ages ago, but I know a lot of you do love that one from GT2. Kind of unusual for something like a GT2 track to suddenly potentially come back. Gran Turismo and Polyphony haven't really been doing that too often if you think about it, so if it does come back that will be kind of a big deal. Next one is Rome. Of course, ages ago in the video I talked about the other version of Rome, so it depends which version you want to go for. This is the Gran Turismo 2 and 3 version, so the old school version of Rome. I feel like I probably drove more on that one than the later one, to be honest. The next one is Sardinia. I end up racing here quite a bit because of career mode events, but I certainly wouldn't call it one of my absolute favourites. The next one is Sardinia Windmills. Ironically, I race here all the time, and any who watch my special projects builds for rally cars will know I take them here quite a lot. I really like windmills. I love the flow. It's nice and quick for just showcasing what a rally car can do, and yeah, I actually would say that Sardinia is probably one of my favourite recent Gran Turismo tracks, but not quite in my top 10. The next one though is most definitely in my top 10, and I really wish it could come back, but I don't think it's going to. Definitely my favourite city course. It's my number 4 in fact, Seattle. I adore Seattle circuit. I always have. It's one of the most consistent loves for me from when it was introduced in Gran Turismo 2. Immediately fell in love with it, of course, through GT3, especially GT4. Absolutely love Seattle. Sticking on the topic of city courses though, the next one, I feel like I didn't appreciate it enough as a kid, and I probably enjoy it a lot more now, and it's super wide open in terms of how wide the course actually is. Seoul, the Korean circuit, Seoul Central. I feel like I'd probably love this track if I got the chance to race on it in a more recent game, but as it happens, I don't have a huge amount of memories from this one, so I don't quite have that connection there. Many people will have a connection for the next one though, because it's Silverstone. I know, once again, I'm on the wrong side of the fence here, because I cannot stand Silverstone. I don't care if it doesn't come back. I know there were rumours or something or other that I talked about ages ago about it returning, but I just don't care about Silverstone. I couldn't care less. I know it's iconic. I've been there. It's just not for me. Next up, we have another rally course. Couple of different variations. There's North and South. Smoky Mountain. I don't quite have the memories that many people seem to, but yeah, I definitely recognise the name as soon as someone says it. The track, not so much. I don't have a huge amount of memories of that one. Next up though, we have a few different special stages. One of these, you already know which one, is going to be my top 10. First up, Route 5. Many people love this one in its various forms, and for good reason. I feel like it's a shame that Tokyo has kind of taken the space up from Route 5 and a couple of the other routes, I guess you could say as well, because to me Tokyo doesn't have anywhere near the kind of personality. Next up we have special stage Route 7. This one a bit more unique, more of like a motorway drag strip kind of thing. Didn't spend a huge amount of time there myself, but I love the idea of it. It's very reminiscent almost of the Tokyo Extreme Racer games, which is pretty cool. Special stage Route 11, of course that's a OG circuit, literally it was around in the very first game and the third game as well. I don't have many memories of that one, but much more technical of a city course, very tight, so of course there's lots to love there. The next one is of course in my top 10. I feel like some of you might have it in your top 10, but I know a lot of people find it to be just too boring. And this is, despite not being my favourite track, this is actually my number 8. Above Sierra, believe it or not, Route X. I have more miles on this track than anywhere else in the whole franchise, something like 150, 160,000 miles. And the craziest thing is, the vast majority of those are just from Gran Turismo 6, which is insane when you really break down that kind of mileage in one game. It may even be higher than that, because I played through the game a couple of times, but it's at least that kind of mileage. Sticking on the theme of ovals though, the next one I recall driving on, but it was just way too short for me to love it, and that is Super Speedway. Now we're not talking about Motegi. We'll get there in a second, but this is not Motegi Super Speedway, but it's very clearly inspired by it, and I feel like they might have had this back in Gran Turismo 2 and 3 because they maybe couldn't get the rights to Motegi, because the speedway back then was pretty much identical to it. I did a lot of time here earning cash in Gran Turismo 2 in various cars, but I wouldn't say that I love it. It was more like a necessity course for me. The next one I do love quite a lot. It's not in my top 10, sacrilege I know, but Suzuka. I feel like everyone and their mum loves Suzuka. It's such a legendary track. You might even put it as like the pinnacle of Japanese tracks maybe. Tons of different events held there for good reason. It's a great mix of high-speed sections and technical corners. Yeah, love Suzuka. Not quite in my top 10, but great track. Swiss Alps is up next, Gran Turismo 3 and 4 in particular. I don't find that I really care much for Swiss Alps. I don't have many memories of it, which usually says a lot for me. The next one is Tahiti. There's Tahiti Circuit and Tahiti Maze and Tahiti Road. Tahiti Road was, as the name suggests, a tarmac-based event, and then the other two were both dirt. I feel like I was here quite a lot, especially for doing re-reviews of Gran Turismo 2, or not re-reviews, but going back to GT2 to do reviews, and I raced there a lot, but I wouldn't say that I loved it. I think a lot of people will have memories from Tahiti though. The next one is the test course. This is in particular Gran Turismo 1 and 2 though, which was basically that version of like the Route X, if you will, of the time. Again, spent a lot of time there, but didn't have a huge amount of love for it. Next up is Tokyo Expressway. Of course, there's a lot of different ones within there, much more recent addition. I've already said my piece about Tokyo. I don't think it has as much personality, and it's a shame that it's pretty much all we've got to work with now for city courses, which is straight up sad in my opinion. And the next one makes me even more sad, because to me this one has way more fun to it and way more personality. Tokyo Route 246. How can you have Tokyo as well, and yet somehow the track is so much more fun? And again, it is of course the nostalgia playing a role, but even then I feel like if they were to bring Route 246 back, I think a lot of players would prefer it, especially if they haven't driven on it before, so I don't think it is just the nostalgia, but I guess we'd have to see. Next one is the Top Gear test course. I know I should love it more than I do, but to me it's a bit known, it's a bit short, it's a bit bland looking almost, and I think everyone would have to admit that the Top Gear track looks a lot better when you have the context of the show with the kind of camera angles and stuff, which is cool because Forza did that. Although I say it's cool, it was very uncool because every time I'd upload a video, BBC would claim it, even though it was from Forza, because they had the exact same camera angles as the Top Gear episode. So it's a very cool track, but to me, I get bored of the Top Gear track quite quickly. The next one is Trial Mountain. Again, I just find that the new iteration does not have the same personality, although I will add the caveat to that, I do think that Trial Mountain has come off a lot better than Deep Forest or Grand Valley in terms of keeping its personality more in GT7, because it hasn't changed quite as much. And I do appreciate that. And of course they featured it quite a bit, if I recall, in the trailers. I remember seeing the Carrera GT there, I think the Diablo was there, the 911 GT1, I think the Alpha 155 might have even been there as well, and even the Mono, I seem to recall, was all on that track. So they really heavily featured it, and they knew exactly what they were doing with that. Next one is Tsukuba. Tsukuba's very mixed for me. For a while, I think it was the only course in Gran Turismo that had like proper rain, or a proper wet course, back in Gran Turismo 4. That was quite cool. It's very short though, it's fun, it's charming, and it's great for drifting, but yeah, not one of my absolute favourites. The next one is a great one though, Motegi. I do think Motegi definitely should come back. There's a bunch of different versions, and very few tracks, especially real ones, have as many variants that feel so wildly different, especially if you compare the full course to the Speedway. I mean, talk about wildly different. The Speedway, I could take it or leave it, but the road course, the East course, the West course, great circuits, very straight line oriented. Watkins Glen is up next. Of course, we're drawing very close to the end here. This is a very recent addition, just in Gran Turismo 7. I don't love Watkins Glen. It's got some charm. I feel like for some people who maybe live near there or visit quite a lot, you'll probably love it. I don't have that connection, of course, and I don't have the nostalgia. And also, it's a little bit too short for me, a little bit too simple, but it's fun. It's a bit of a mixed one. I can kind of take it or leave it. The next one is a fantastic course. Almost made my top 10. Would have probably been around 11 or 12. Laguna Seca, or the reason why it's this far down the list, WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca. We used to call it Mazda Raceway, I think that was in Forza maybe, and I believe the main sponsor has changed there a few times, or the ownership or whatever, but I mean, talk about iconic. It came in Gran Turismo 2 and it's been there ever since, so that's a pretty damn consistent run for a track to keep going in a franchise. It was technically an update in GT Sport, but even then, you know, it's still in the game. So Laguna Seca, yeah, absolutely legendary track. It is one of the tracks which I would really love to visit in real life as well, to do a track day. As a kid, I was kind of on it. I like it more over time for sure, and it's such an iconic track. Definitely one of the most iconic in the world. And last, and for some people maybe least, Willow Springs. Willow Springs, of course, another American circuit. You'll see this one pop up occasionally in like a movie like Ford v Ferrari, or I think some channels might even do some testing of their cars here, or at least somewhere else that looks like dirt in the middle of the desert. It doesn't have a huge amount of character here for me, and I know that's sacrilege for some people. I think the reason why I'm not a huge fan of Willow Springs is because it kind of feels like an American version of the Top Gear test track for me. Like, it's kind of wide open, it's kind of flat, but it's not flat, but it kind of looks flat. And there's not much personality because there's not really much going on visually, aside from the time of day making it look better than it actually does. But I'm sure it's great to drive on in real life, but I don't like how vague the track is. It's like kind of just, oh, go over there somewhere kind of thing, or break somewhere around here. It's a bit mixed for me. Ultimately, that is all of the tracks that were featured in the Gran Turismo series. Pretty wild list, and I'm sure for some of you, at least a few of these will have jogged your memory. And just to recap my personal top 10, and of course I will be checking all the comments and tabulating them for a future revisiting for part 2, where we see what the collective favourites of everyone is. In number 10, New York. Number 9, Sierra. Number 8, Special Stage Route X. Number 7, City di Area. Number 6, Road Atlanta. Number 5, Complex String. Number 4, Seattle. Number 3, Infineon. Number 2, the Nordschleife. And number 1, Le Mans. aka Lassart, aka 24 Heures du Mans. So those are my top 10. I feel like many of those will probably feature in your top 10s as well. You might even align with me on some of them. And just to be clear, you don't necessarily have to put them in order for yourself. You could just put 10 in any order. But obviously, if you do order it, it will add even more help to me when we tabulate it up later on. So I hope you've enjoyed me for part 1 of this particular community discussion journey. Of course, we will revisit it for part 2 when enough time has passed for plenty of comments, etc. And of course, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.